Have you ever felt that strange modern vertigo? That feeling of having all the freedom in the world, yet feeling completely invisible? Today, we're not just talking about movies. We're using cinema as a survival guide for the soul. We're exploring cinema thinking, a journey through the masterpieces of film to understand why we feel so alone and how we can finally find our way back to each other. From the cold shadows of the Godfather to the quiet longing of Her, we're going to look at these stories as mirrors of our own lives. We'll be diving deep into these stories, so spoilers are inevitable. But even if you haven't seen a single one of these films, stay with me, because the stories we're telling today aren't just about fictional characters, they're about you. We're using these scenes as blueprints to map out the human heart. Welcome. I want you to take a moment and travel back. Go back to those very first years of your life, when the world wasn't just a place, but a colossal, looming mystery. Do you remember how high the ceilings felt? How you had to strain on your tiptoes just to see what was resting on the kitchen table? In those days, the world was an enigma. When a thunderstorm rolled in, shaking the windows, or when a sudden fever burned through your body, you had no conceptual grip on the why. You simply felt small, profoundly, undeniably small. You were a tiny speck drifting in a world of titans. This feeling, this deep-seated sense of biological and existential inferiority is exactly where we shake hands with our ancient ancestors. To the ancient man, life was a continuous lesson in helplessness. A sudden flood could wash away your entire village in a heartbeat. An earthquake could open the earth and swallow your history whole. Disease was a ghost that struck without warning. They had no grasp of the how or the why of nature's brutality. They were in every sense perpetual 5-year-olds in a world that didn't care for them. And in that world of crushing uncertainty, there was no such thing as I. The individual was a luxury the world couldn't afford. There was only the tribe, only the blood. Take a deep look at the world of Game of Thrones. If you look past the dragons and the politics, you see a grid of rigid, inescapable destiny. In those smoke-filled taverns of King's Landing or the frozen halls of the North, people don't have choices, they have stations. If your father was a blacksmith, the hammer was placed in your hand the moment you could grip it. If you were born a peasant, your story ended in the same mud where it began. Why? Because the idea of choosing was unthinkable. Who were you to choose? Identity wasn't something you found. It was something you were assigned. Marriage wasn't a union of souls or a romantic pursuit of love. That's a modern fairy tale. Back then, it was a cold, calculated contract designed to increase the tribe's numbers, to ensure there were enough hands to till the soil and enough bodies to hold the line in war. But why did they accept this? Why did they embrace such a crushing lack of agency? To understand that, we have to look at the myths they breathed. Look at this canvas. Look at the way the light strikes the contorted muscles of Prometheus. Look at those jagged, heavy shadows. Dirk van Baburen didn't just paint a myth, he painted the ultimate scream of human suffering. Prometheus, a god from the old guard, decided to fashion a new kind of creature. He chose to make us, but he didn't just make us, he made us in the likeness of the gods themselves. And Zeus, the ultimate father of the heavens, he was livid. In the ancient mind, humanity was never supposed to be here. We were contraband in the universe, interlopers who had no right to the divine spark. When Prometheus stole fire from the heavens to give us warmth, to give us a chance at survival, Zeus didn't just punish the thief. He sent a message to all of humanity. He chained Prometheus to a desolate rock for eternity. Every single day, an eagle descends to tear out his liver, devouring it while he is wide awake. And every night, the liver grows back, just so the agony can start again at sunrise. Think about the narrative the ancient world accepted. They believed they were unwanted. They saw themselves as accidents who were only allowed to persist because they bowed low enough. This is that same unwanted ache we sometimes feel in childhood, the fear that we are just a burden on the grown-ups, a nuisance in a world that was already complete before we arrived. Ancient humans lived with this existential wound, but they found a bitter, cold comfort in it. They realized that as long as they stayed under the shadow of a powerful father or a god king, they were safe from the storms. They traded their freedom for a shelter made of stone and tradition. Now bring that myth into the cinematic frame. Look at the cold, unyielding eyes of Tywin Lannister. When Tywin gazes at his children, he isn't looking at people. He is Zeus forging the chains. He is the ultimate father of the era of inheritance. To him, Tyrion or Jaime are not individuals with dreams or flaws. They are assets. They are bricks in a wall. Remember that scene where he's skinning the stag, his hands covered in blood. He tells Jaime, "The house that bears my name will live on. It is the only thing that lives on. Not your personal glory, not my honor, but family." For Tywin, the individual is a sin. To want something for yourself is a betrayal of the blood. We see this same divine father archetype in the shadows of the Godfather. Don Vito Corleone sits in that darkened office, and he is more than a man. He is a priest king. He is the one who decides what is just and what is not. When he strokes that cat and speaks in that hushed, gravelly tone, he is providing a cosmic order for his people. In his world, no one wakes up and asks, "What is my passion?" or "What is my dream?" They only ask, "How can I serve the family?" This ancient certainty was brutal, yes, it was stifling. But we have to be honest, it offered something that we, in our modern world, are starving for, meaning through necessity. If you were a blacksmith's son, you never had a quarter-life crisis. You never sat in a cafe at 2 a.m. wondering if you were living your best life. Your path was paved before you were born. You were part of a lineage, a link in a chain that stretched back 1,000 years. There was a profound security in that forced paradise. Like a child who feels safe because their father is holding their hand, the ancient man felt safe because the king, the priest, and the father told him exactly where he fit in the universe. Look at the great stone statues of ancient Egypt or the stoic friezes of Greece. They are motionless, they are eternal. They represent a world where nothing changes, where the divine order is as fixed as the stars. This is the first layer of our existence, the cradle of the tribe. But the tragedy of being human is that children eventually grow up. The fathers eventually stumble. The moment Michael Corleone realizes that his father, his god, is a mortal man who can bleed and fail, or the moment Jaime Lannister realizes that Tywin's family honor is just a mask for his own ego, that is when the ancient world begins to die. That is when the child human is forced to step out of the nursery. It's the terrifying moment we realize the innocence of the father was a lie we needed to believe so we could sleep without the lights on. We were buried under our family names, hidden in the safety of our tribes. But as we're about to see, the cord had to be cut. We had to trade that heavy, suffocating certainty for a fragile, terrifying thing called choice. We left the Masonic temples of our fathers, only to realize that the open sky is a very, very lonely place. Part 2. The Great Divide. Think about that precise moment when a crack begins to spiderweb across a solid stone wall. You can't stop it. The structural integrity is already gone. In the history of the human soul, that crack is what I call the Great Divide. There's a scene in The Godfather Part 2 that perfectly captures this earthquake. We're in a flashback, gathered around a dining table. All the brothers are there. They're waiting to surprise Don Vito for his birthday. It's a picture of tribal unity. But then Michael, the quiet one, drops a bombshell. I've enlisted in the Marines. The reaction is visceral. Sonny lunges at him, screaming, "You're risking your life for strangers? For a country that isn't your blood? What about your family? What about your duty?" In that moment, Michael says something that shakes the very foundations of the ancient world. "I made my own plans." But pay close attention to how that scene ends. One by one, the brothers get up to greet the Don in the other room. The camera stays behind, and we see Michael sitting there, completely alone at the vast empty table. It's a haunting image. This is the surgical reality of cutting the umbilical cord. The moment you choose yourself over the tribe, you are rewarded with freedom, but you are also punished with a sudden, freezing silence. You gain your life, but you lose the table. When those rigid bonds of inheritance started to fray, something revolutionary happened, and cinema shows it better than any history book. Look at Fiddler on the Roof. We meet Tevye, a poor milkman in a deeply traditional village where life is governed by one word: tradition. In Tevye's world, the father picks the husbands for his daughters. Why? Because marriage wasn't a romance. It was an economic and tribal pact for survival. But Tevye's daughters begin to dismantle this order, one by one. I'll never forget the scene where his eldest, Zeitel, stands before him and refuses to marry the wealthy old butcher he chose for her. She tells him she's in love with Motel, a penniless tailor. Tevye is paralyzed. In his ancient mind, he's thinking, love, affection. Since when did marriage have anything to do with feelings? Marriage is a duty. But as he looks into his daughter's eyes, he sees something he's never truly reckoned with: personal choice based on affection. This is the moment the world changes. When you choose your partner because you love them and not because the tribe commanded it, you are planting a dangerous seed. Why dangerous? Because the moment humans realized they could choose in the most private part of their lives, the family, they started asking a much bigger question. If I can choose my spouse based on my heart, why can't I choose my king based on my mind? This was the secret engine behind the fall of empires. In the classical era, the king was the father of the nation. You couldn't change him any more than you could change your own DNA. But when the family transformed from a prison of duty into a union of choice, the thrones of the world started to wobble. The ruler was no longer a divine right. The ruler had to be worthy of our consent. Look at this masterpiece by Edgar Degas, The Bellelli Family. In old classical paintings, families were always depicted as a solid, smiling block of power. But Degas gives us the modern fracture. Look at the husband and wife. She stands on one side, he sits on the other. They aren't looking at each other. There's a vast, cold distance between them. Degas is whispering a hard truth. Even under the same roof, if there is no affection, you are strangers. This painting is the death certificate of the era of inheritance. Blood is no longer enough to keep us together. We see the peak of this selective affection in Terrence Malick's A Hidden Life. Franz, a simple farmer in a Nazi-occupied Austrian village, is told he must swear an oath to Hitler. The entire tribe, the church, the neighbors, the state, screams at him, "It is your duty. You belong to this folk." But Franz has a different anchor, his love for his wife and the quiet voice of his own conscience. He chooses to be cast out, to be chained, and even to face death, rather than submit to that filthy tribal bond. The scenes of Franz and his wife running through the emerald fields of their farm, that is the image of the modern family. They aren't together because of tradition, they chose each other, and that choice is what gives Franz the strength to stand against the new father, the monstrous state. Here we see that affection, unlike inheritance, is a force that both liberates us and isolates us. But let's be honest, this great divide came with a staggering price tag: anxiety. When Tevi finally allows his daughter to follow her heart, he feels the ground beneath him turning to sand. He asks, if everything is based on our own whims and feelings, where does the line between right and wrong exist? This is the question that broke the modern mind. Look at Jon Snow in Game of Thrones. Jon was always the outsider, the bastard. He had no place in the rigid inheritance of the Lannisters or the Starks. But that rootlessness is exactly what allowed him to build new bonds based on merit and affection. He allies with the wildlings, not because they share his blood, but because he feels a deep human connection to them. Yet, look at the sadness in that man's eyes. Jon Snow is perpetually lonely because he no longer has the safety of that ancient tribal blanket. He has to choose every single moment, and every choice tears a piece of his soul away. This is why family is the heart of cinema. It was the first place we practiced being an individual. The moment Michael Corleone asks his mother, what was Papa really thinking in his heart? He's looking for the man behind the myth. His mother doesn't even understand the question. To her generation, being a person and being part of the family were the same thing. Michael is hunting for the lost individual. The transition from inheritance to affection is like cutting the umbilical cord. It's messy, it's painful, but it's the only way to breathe. We've left the grand nursery of the ancient world. Fathers like Tywin Lannister can no longer tell us who to be or who to love. But now we face a new crisis. In a world where everything is a choice, how do we know if we've chosen right? Look at Velázquez's Rokeby Venus. She sits with her back to us, looking at herself in a mirror. That mirror is our modern consciousness. We are no longer staring at the lips of a king or a father to tell us our worth. We are staring into the mirror of affection, looking for someone to recognize us, not just to order us around. But as we've severed the ties of blood, we found ourselves drifting into a void of freedom. We are now the kings of our own tiny territories, but we are kings who can't sleep at night because of the deafening silence of our own choices. This is where we must go next, to the modern maze, to the world where we ran from our fathers, only to become slaves to the validation of strangers. We traded the prison of the tribe for the Hall of Mirrors. But before we go there, look one more time at Tevye's daughters dancing. They are radiant, but behind them, their ancient village is burning. They are walking toward freedom, but the path ahead is much colder and much lonelier than they ever imagined. Part 3. Vertigo in the Hall of Mirrors. The anxiety of choice and the longing to be seen. We've snapped the chains of inheritance and we're floating in a vast, weightless void. Do you remember that magical scene in The Worst Person in the World? Julie is in her kitchen. She flips a light switch and suddenly time stops for the entire world. She runs out of her apartment, weaving through a city of frozen statues, a liberated smile on her face. She's running toward a guy she just met, fueled by pure, unfiltered desire. That scene is the ultimate modern dream. The world stops so that I can pursue my whim. But if you look at the rest of the film, Julie is the avatar of a much deeper ache, the anxiety of choice. She doesn't know if she wants to be a doctor, a photographer, or a writer. She doesn't know if she's in love with Axel, the refined artist, or Eyvind, the simple barista. Julie is lonelier than any of her ancestors because her horizon of possibilities is infinite. When you can be anyone, you are haunted by a terrifying ghost. The fear that the person you are right now is the wrong version of yourself. Take a look at Edward Hopper's Nighthawks, that late-night diner bathed in that harsh, cold, fluorescent light. A few people are sitting there. They are physically close, but they are islands. No one is talking, no one is touching. They chose to be there. They chose those clothes. They chose that life. But in that heavy silence, they seem to be asking, am I even here? Does anyone see me? The giant glass window of that diner is just like the screens on our phones. We see each other perfectly, but we can't reach through the glass. This is the loneliness of excessive freedom. This is where a fundamental human hunger, what Hegel called recognition, becomes painful. We only truly know we exist when we see our reflection in the eyes of another. But in this modern world where the tribe is gone and no one is forced to care about us, we've become refugees looking for mirrors. We are desperate for our choices, our style, our movies, our politics, to be validated. Why? Because that's the only way we can convince ourselves that our choices are real. Theodore, in the movie Her, is the patron saint of this condition. His job is to write beautiful, intimate letters for other people. He is literally a factory of affection, yet he lives in a hollow, hyper-modern apartment, drowning in a vacuum. Why does he fall in love with Samantha, an AI? Because Samantha is programmed to recognize him perfectly. She has no friction. She is the perfect mirror, reflecting back exactly the man Theodore wants to be. But here's the problem with real human relationships: conflict. When you encounter a real person, they have their own nuclear core. They might not validate you, they might challenge you. And because we've become so psychologically fragile in our modern isolation, we can't handle that rejection. So we flee, we run towards selective tribes. We don't spend time with the difficult neighbor or the annoying cousin anymore. Instead, we join Telegram groups and follow pages that think exactly like us. We crave a constant loop of likes to silence the screaming anxiety of our own freedom. Look at Giacometti's sculptures, those thin, withered figures that look like they're evaporating into the air. Look at the walking man. He has no flesh, no history, just a skeletal frame pushing forward. This is us after we stepped out from the shadow of Tywin Lannister. We are free, yes, but we are so thin that we feel like we might disappear into the void of our own choices. We see this collision between ancient simplicity and modern ambition in the Banshees of Inisherin. Colm suddenly decides to stop talking to his lifelong friend, Padric, because he thinks Padric is dull. Colm wants to write music. He wants to be great. He wants to belong to the lineage of artists. He sacrifices a forced tribal friendship for a higher choice. But look at the result, a bloody, soul-crushing loneliness. Colm thinks that by cutting out the ordinary, he'll find recognition, but he only finds a barren island. This is why we are addicted to our digital tribes. In the modern world, value isn't decided by the gods anymore. It's decided by consensus. If I choose a certain lifestyle, I need a virtual tribe to tell me, "Good job, you're doing it right," so I can sleep at night. We are so afraid of being wrong that we run toward a new kind of modern conformity. Look at Ilya Repin's painting, Ivan the Terrible and his son. Look at that horrific moment where the father has killed his son and is now staring with bulging eyes at the corpse. This is a metaphor for our relationship with our roots. We killed the ancient certainty to be free, but now we are sitting over the body of that old security, terrified of the silence. We are like the figure in Caspar David Friedrich's Wanderer above the sea of fog. The view is magnificent, the horizon is open, but the fog covers everything. We don't know where to step next. We are desperate for someone to wave through that fog and say, "I'm here too. I'm just as scared as you are, and I see you." This is the modern standoff. We have the right to choose, but we've lost the skill of connection. Like Theodore in Her, we've learned to talk to shadows, but when it comes to touching a real hand, with all its rough edges and imperfections, we flinch, because a real connection means accepting that the other is not my mirror. They are another universe entirely, and they might just tell me that I'm wrong. So we stay stuck here, between a swollen ego that wants total independence and a desperate heart that will sell its kingdom for a single like of validation. We are lonely kings, but is there a way out? A way to be an individual and still truly connect? To find that answer, we have to look at the final piece of the puzzle. We have to stop being carpenters and start becoming gardeners. We have to learn how to love not the reflection, but the reality. And for that, we need to go to the final stage. Part 4. The Art of Reconciliation. So after all this, the heavy chains of the past and the cold mirrors of the present, is that it? Are we just destined to be lonely kings in a digital void? Absolutely not, because this isn't where the story ends. This is where the real human project begins. I believe we are standing at the most beautiful moment in history, because for the first time, we have the chance to learn what affection truly means when it's stripped of duty and desperation. Look at Joel and Clementine in that crumbling hallway. They've just realized they've loved each other, hurt each other, and tried to erase each other from their very memories. Clementine, with her messy, colorful hair, looks at him and says, "I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. I'm going to get bored with you, and you'll feel trapped." And Joel? He just looks at her with all the tired kindness in the world and says one word, "Okay." That "okay" is the most revolutionary statement of the modern age. Joel isn't a carpenter anymore. He's not trying to carve Clementine into a perfect statue that fits his ego. He's not looking for a divine father to bless their union. He has looked into the abyss of her flaws and his own, and he has accepted them. That "okay" means I choose you, not because you're perfect, but because you are real. This is what the psychologist Alison Gopnik calls the gardening model of love. A carpenter has a blueprint. If the wood is warped, he cuts it. That's Tywin Lannister. But a gardener knows that the soil, the weather, and the plants have their own nuclear core. You don't control a garden. You create the space for it to grow in its own chaotic, beautiful way. Look at Paterson and Laura in Jim Jarmusch's Paterson. He's a quiet bus driver who writes poetry. She's a dreamer who changes her passion every single day. He doesn't tell her to be realistic. He doesn't judge her imperfections. He watches her with the eyes of a gardener. They don't necessarily understand every corner of each other's souls, but they recognize them. They allow each other to exist without interference. This is the modern salvation, recognition without manipulation. We see this in Hirokazu Koreeda's Shoplifters. Here is a family with zero biological ties, a group of outcasts who stole each other from the world. Why is it so heartbreaking? Because it shows that affection can be thicker than blood. When they stand on that beach jumping over the waves, they aren't bound by ancestral duty. They are bound by the fact that they chose to be there. They are weak, they are poor, but they are seen. This is the chosen tribe, not the one we were born into, but the one we built with our own scarred hands. but how do we deal with the pain of being individual? How do we live with the holes in our hearts? Look at the characters in Drive My Car. Two broken souls sitting in a red Saab, driving through the silent landscapes of Japan. They don't fill the silence with noise or likes. They sit with their grief. They recognize each other's shadows. The peace they find at the end of the road isn't a happy ending in the traditional sense. It's a kintsugi ending. In Japan, they fix broken pottery with gold. They don't hide the cracks. They highlight them. They say, "This bowl is more beautiful because it was broken." Our modern lives, our fractured families, our lonely choices, they are all kintsugi. And that makes us 1,000 times more precious than any cold, unbroken statue of the past. So don't let anyone tell you that we are lost. We aren't lost, we are awake. And being awake always comes with a bit of a shiver. We've learned that family isn't a fortress. It's a constant living conversation. We've learned that love isn't an obsession. It's a witnessing. We aren't living in the dark temples of Egypt anymore. We're living in houses made of glass. Is it terrifying? Yes, but look at how the light comes through. We are learning to speak the language of reconciliation. We are learning to say, like the characters in Lost in Translation, that a whisper in a crowded city can be enough to sustain a soul for a lifetime. We've traded certainty for truth. We've traded inheritance for integrity. Next time you feel that modern vertigo, remember Joel and Clementine. Remember the snow falling on the ruins of their memories, and remember that they chose to stay anyway. The greatest courage of the human spirit isn't to be chained by a king. It's the courage to stay when you have every reason and every right to leave. We are the gardeners of the ruins. We are the poets of the bus routes. We are the architects of a new kind of affection, one that doesn't ask for a mirror, but asks for a hand to hold in the dark. And that is why we keep watching. That is why we keep choosing. That is why, despite the silence of the universe, we keep dancing on the edge of the divide.